Sources close to William say he wants to draw a line in the sand on the issue and make clear that while his faith may be more private, he takes the role very seriously. Meghan Markle constantly trying to compete with Prince William and Princess Kate. It needs to stop.
There's this quiet question hanging over Prince William, and almost nobody says it out loud because it hits something most public figures keep locked down tight. It's not about gossip or surface-level stuff. It goes way deeper than that. We're talking about faith, not the polished public version, but the real, lived-in kind. What does William actually believe when no cameras are around? How does he see his connection to God on a personal level?
He understands the importance of the fact that he will become head of that institution in due course.
And here's where it gets even more intense. What does all of that mean for a man who's expected to one day step into the role of king and at the same time become the supreme governor of the Church of England? This question is suddenly back in the spotlight this week, and the timing is not random at all. A report in the Times dropped right as William showed up at the enthronement of the new Archbishop of Canterbury at Canterbury Cathedral, and it painted a very controlled picture of his beliefs. According to the report, his faith is quiet, private, and low-key, nothing loud or showy.
Their world looking at him asking where you stand on something like this when religion has become a private pursuit in our lives. You know, it's not something like it was in the 1950s where you expected to see everyone at church, maybe.
Not the type of person making regular Sunday appearances or putting his devotion on display for the world to see. Sources close to William even say he's drawn a clear line around this topic, like he doesn't want it picked apart in public. But at the same time, they insist the belief is real. It matters to him, even if he keeps it behind closed doors. And this is where things start to feel bigger than they first seem. The timing of all this matters because this wasn't just another formal ceremony. It was one of the most symbolically charged events in the entire Anglican Church. For the first time in over 1,400 years, a woman has stepped into the role of Archbishop of Canterbury.
Future king, I do think it is, he talks about his quiet faith. He's not someone who will be, as he says, I don't rush off to church every Sunday.
Yeah.
But I think he's beginning to understand what being the king is all about, and over these next few years, and that's just one of his important roles.
That is not small history. That's a massive shift in a church that traces its roots all the way back to the era of Henry VIII. This moment carries serious weight, and everyone watching knows it. William didn't just show up casually either. He was there with Catherine, standing front and center, not as a distant figure, not as a curious guest, but as the future king. The man expected to one day lead the institution was watching the person who will most likely crown him take her place. That's not some side moment. That's a powerful signal of what's coming next. The connection between William and the Anglican Church isn't just tradition. It comes with recent tension that people can't ignore. There's a whole backstory here that adds another layer to how he moves today. Take Justin Welby, the former archbishop who stepped down earlier than expected.
I think it is important that the future king fully understands that within this country, him being the head of the Anglican Church is a significant part of his role as the future king.
During Harry and Meghan's exit from royal life, Welby was seen by many inside royal circles as getting a little too close to their side of the story. That did not sit well with William at all, especially with how public and direct those criticisms of the institution became. Now here's what stands out. William didn't explode, didn't call anything out publicly.
The big announcement that Meghan's doing a 3-day retreat in Australia, and here comes Harry to talk at a mental health seminar.
Didn't turn it into a spectacle. Instead, he went quiet and created distance. People close to him describe it as a noticeable coolness, the kind that says everything without saying a word. It came across as someone watching closely, seeing exactly where others stood when things got tense, and then adjusting how much access they get moving forward. When Welby was replaced, William didn't carry that same energy into the new chapter. He approached the incoming archbishop with a clean slate. No baggage, no leftover tension from the past situation. This wasn't about holding on to grudges like some people try to claim. It actually shows a more calculated side of him. Someone who has been through enough high-pressure moments to know that people reveal their true positions when things get messy. And once he sees that, he doesn't forget it. He just moves smarter with it. William keeps track, no doubt about it. He knows exactly which journalists, clergy, and public figures stayed neutral during the most intense moments of the Sussex situation, and which ones clearly picked a side. And based on that, he's adjusted how he deals with people moving forward. This isn't about payback or acting out of emotion. It's more controlled than that, more calculated. It's discretion, not vindictiveness, and that difference matters more than people realize. Now, when it comes to his faith, especially during the incredibly casual period of 2024, things get even more personal. Within just weeks, both his wife and his father were facing serious health battles. That kind of situation hits hard, and it's not something outsiders can fully understand. And honestly, it's probably not something they should try to define for him. But one thing is clear. When someone is forced to confront the possibility of loss, especially involving the people closest to them, it shifts something deep inside. It changes how you think about purpose, about life, and about what might exist beyond what we can actually see. And then there's Catherine, facing her own cancer diagnosis with this calm strength and quiet spiritual balance that left a strong impression on people watching. She spoke carefully about what she went through, but even in those few words, there was a sense of something deeper holding her steady through it all. What came through in Catherine's public messages during that time felt powerful and stripped back. There was this clear sense of someone who had been through something heavy and came out seeing life differently. The noise faded, the distractions didn't matter anymore, and what was left was a sharp focus on what truly counts. Whether that shift came from a deeper sense of faith, or just the kind of clarity that serious illness forces onto a person, is something only Catherine can truly answer. That part stays with her. But one thing is impossible to miss. Both William and Catherine came out of 2024 changed. Not in a small way either, but in a way you can actually see. More serious, more locked in, and more committed than ever to the role and responsibility they carry. And that shift in seriousness is showing up clearly in how William is preparing for what's ahead. You can see it in how he's engaging with the church, how he handled the enthronement, and even in the way questions about his faith are being approached now. Nothing about it feels casual anymore. All of this points to someone who fully understands the weight of what's coming his way. The responsibility, the expectations, the spotlight, it's all getting very real, very fast. Now switch the focus to Meghan and the situation in Australia, because the contrast could not be sharper. The trip is moving forward, but the narrative building around it? It's not looking good at all. A poll out of Yahoo Australia tried to gauge the mood around Harry and Meghan's upcoming visit, and the result was rough. Out of 747 responses, only 5% said they were excited, while a massive 95% said they were not interested at all. Now, it's not some perfectly scientific survey, but it still sends a pretty loud signal about the current vibe. And then there's the event itself, which raises even more eyebrows. It's a 3-day retreat hosted by podcaster 𝗣𝗲𝗶𝗵𝗵, with a price tag sitting at around 3,000 Australian dollars per person. That's roughly 1,500 pounds or 2,000 US dollars. And for that price, attendees are expected to share rooms with strangers while being promised a lifestyle and wellness experience. That alone has people talking. The setting doesn't exactly help either. The venue is reportedly a hotel still going through renovations, which adds another layer of skepticism around the whole thing. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Multiple reports suggest the guest list hasn't even sold out yet. On top of that, Meghan wasn't originally invited to be part of this event. Instead, she's said to have entered through existing social connections maintained by her team. For the organizer, the benefit is obvious. Even with mixed public opinion, the Sussex name still grabs attention and headlines, and that kind of visibility is hard to pass up. Meghan also has something to gain here, no question about it. Australia is a market she's been trying to break into, and this retreat gives her a way in without needing a full-scale business launch behind it. It's a softer entry point, but still very intentional. But here's where things get a little confusing. Why Australia? For a California-based lifestyle brand, the United States would be the obvious first move. And if you look at personal ties, Canada actually makes even more sense. She spent years in Toronto filming Suits, built connections there, and would likely face fewer complications getting products into that market. Australia doesn't really check either of those boxes. So, what's the real reason? It comes down to sentiment and maybe a bit of nostalgia. Back in 2018, Harry and Meghan had a hugely successful tour in Australia. The 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗵𝗵 was warm, the crowd showed up, and the media coverage painted a picture of a couple at their peak. It felt like a genuine connection at a time when everything around them still had that fresh, post-wedding glow. And it seems like Meghan hasn't forgotten that moment. There's a clear attempt to tap back into that same energy, to recreate what once worked so well. But here's the issue, and it's a big one. That was 7 years ago. The public that showed up back then wasn't just reacting to Harry and Meghan as individuals, they were responding to something very specific. It was the excitement of a new royal couple, the novelty, the romance, the feeling that something fresh had arrived on the scene. It was the thrill of a royal visit mixed with Hollywood shine, and that exact formula just can't be recreated now. The conditions that made 2018 feel electric are gone. The novelty is faded, the romance is more complicated, and even the royal connection doesn't land the same way anymore. And the Australian public, no matter where they stand on the monarchy, seems to have moved on from that wave of excitement. Now bring this into the bigger brand picture, especially looking at Meghan's recent social media and newsletter content. The flower arranging clips, the soft glimpses of 𝗍𝗶𝗵𝗵, the polished entertaining tips with cheese boards and champagne glasses. It all looks good on the surface. But here's what's missing, and it stands out once you notice it. The kind of detail that actually makes a lifestyle brand work. There's no real, usable expertise being shared. No step-by-step guidance, no clear takeaways that someone can apply in their own life. The flower arranging content? It shows 𝗍𝗶𝗶𝗵-styled flowers, but doesn't teach anyone how to actually do it themselves. The entertaining tips? They describe what a perfect setup looks like, but don't give anything practical that people didn't already know. So what you're left with is aesthetic without substance. It looks polished, it feels curated, but it doesn't equip the audience with anything real they can take away and use. Now look at the contrast, because it's hard to ignore once you see it. Take King Charles and his approach to gardening, something he's been deeply invested in for decades. This isn't a surface-level hobby. It's real knowledge built over years of hands-on experience. When Charles talks about composting, native planting, or how a garden connects to the wider ecosystem, he's not just talking to fill space. He's sharing actual, usable insight that comes from doing the work himself over a long time. You can hear it, you can feel it, and it lands differently because it's real. Now compare that to Meghan's flower arranging content. What's being shown isn't wrong, but it's different. It's the look of engagement, not the depth of it. It's polished, it's 𝗍𝗶𝗶𝗵𝗍-styled, but it doesn't carry that same weight of lived experience behind it. Catherine brings another layer to this contrast. When she's out at planting events, you'll see moments that can't be staged. Like when she casually says she doesn't need gloves because she likes to feel the soil with her hands. That's not a scripted line, that's instinct. And those small details matter more than they seem. That kind of off-the-cuff comment only comes from someone who genuinely enjoys what they're doing. It's natural, not performed, and people can tell the difference instantly. With Meghan, the garden often feels more like a backdrop than a lived-in space. The chickens show up here and there, the setting looks right, but something is missing. The hands stay clean, the details stay vague, and the knowledge never really gets specific. And that's where the core issue starts to show. It doesn't feel like something built. Over time, it feels like something built for the content itself. And that difference? It changes how everything is received. At the core of it all, the brand depends on Meghan being seen as an authority on a certain way of living. And that kind of authority doesn't just appear overnight, it's built through real, consistent engagement with something over time. That's where the gap starts to show. The hands-on experience isn't clearly visible, and when the content is pushed further, when it's expected to actually teach something specific, the expertise doesn't fully land. And audiences today are sharp. They consume a huge amount of lifestyle content, and they can tell the difference instantly. They know when they're being given something genuinely useful versus when they're just watching a performance that looks like expertise. And once that line is crossed, it's hard to unsee it. Now the Australian retreat might still generate attention. It could create polished moments, headlines, and social media clips that travel fast. It gives Meghan a stage, a setting, and a narrative to step into. But here's the problem. That kind of visibility doesn't automatically build a strong brand. Real brand power comes from delivering value over time, from giving people something they can actually use, return to, and trust. Without that, it starts to feel like momentum, but not the kind that lasts. It's the appearance of growth, not the substance of it. And in the short term, that difference can be easy to miss. But over time, it becomes obvious, and once it does, it's hard to recover from. Now shifting gears, because another issue is heating up fast. The security situation has already been getting attention, but this week brought a new twist that adds even more pressure. Sources close to Harry's ongoing security case told The Telegraph that he and Meghan could lose their push for taxpayer-funded armed protection in the UK. And the reasoning behind it? Concerns about how the public would react. Inside the decision-making group, there are said to be two different angles being weighed, and that split could end up shaping the final outcome in a big way. One side of this debate is purely political, and it's not hard to see why. The concern is that granting enhanced taxpayer-funded security would be a risky move, especially given current public sentiment toward Harry and Meghan. It's not just about safety, it's about optics, money, and accountability. From that angle, the argument is blunt. Public funds are limited, and support for the couple is not exactly strong right now. So, approving major security costs for two people who have openly criticized the very institution tied to those resources raises serious questions. Add to that the fact that their visits have sometimes overlapped with commercial or legal interests, and it becomes even more complicated. Then there's the issue of role. They are no longer carrying out official royal duties, which traditionally help justify that level of protection. So from a political standpoint, decision-makers are asking a very direct question. Does this expense make sense to the public? Footing the bill? But on the other side, the tone shifts completely. Security professionals are not looking at popularity, they're looking at risk, and risk doesn't care about headlines. Their argument is straightforward but 𝗍𝗍𝗔. The threat level is what it is, and it doesn't go up or down based on whether someone is liked or disliked. Harry is still the king's son, still one of the most recognizable figures in the world, and still someone who has drawn attention from individuals considered dangerous. For the people responsible for protecting him inside the UK, this isn't a debate about image or public opinion. It's about duty, assessment, and preventing real-world harm. And that responsibility exists separately from the political question of whether the protection feels deserved. Both sides of this argument actually make sense, and that's what makes the situation so tense. There's no easy answer here, no clean resolution that satisfies everyone. And the fact that this is being reported by The Telegraph, which isn't known for backing Harry and Meghan, says a lot. It suggests the uncertainty is real and that the political risk is being taken seriously by the people making the call. What's clear from all the coverage is simple but 𝗍𝗍𝗔. The dispute is real, the outcome is still up in the air, and the pressure strategy through the media doesn't seem to be shifting things in Harry's favor. Even the palace response recently stood out. The reference to low trust and bitter experience wasn't subtle, it was sharp and direct, and that kind of tone doesn't come out often. Then there are the optics, and this is where things get even more complicated. Reports pointing to Meghan being seen relaxed in public moments, even in places loaded with emotional history, have raised eyebrows among those following the security debate. For some observers, those details feel out of sync with the level of threat being described. And that mismatch matters more than it might seem, because when behavior doesn't fully align with the level of risk being claimed, it gives critics something to latch onto. Even people trying to assess the situation fairly start to question how it all fits together. That inconsistency doesn't automatically disprove the security concerns, but it does make the overall argument harder to defend in the public space. So, where does this leave everything? Still unresolved and very much in motion. The committee will eventually decide, weighing both the political risk and the professional security assessment. And in the end, Harry will either secure what he's been pushing for through legal action and media pressure, or he won't. What's becoming obvious now is that the press strategy isn't helping, it's making things worse. The low trust issue the palace pointed out isn't just talk, it's real, and it's not going away with more headlines or carefully placed stories. In fact, every new briefing that gets pushed into the media seems to feed the exact pattern the palace is concerned about. It turns into a loop, More stories lead to more skepticism, and more skepticism makes any resolution harder to reach. That cycle is tightening, not easing up. At some point, the approach has to shift, because right now it's not landing the way it's supposed to. Whether it's the Australia retreat, the lifestyle content, or the steady stream of media positioning, none of it is building the kind of traction that actually changes perception. And this isn't guesswork. The signs are right there. The engagement numbers, the public reactions, the overall direction of the brand. It's all visible, and it's not trending in the right direction. The bigger question is whether there's the awareness, or even the willingness, to change course. Because without that, the path stays the same, and so does the outcome. For now, there's still enough public curiosity, enough remaining opportunities, and just enough commercial interest to keep things moving. But that window doesn't stay open forever. Each week, it narrows a little more, and the shift, when it comes, won't be subtle. Now bring it back to William, because this is where the contrast sharpens again. The question of his faith isn't just personal, it connects to something much bigger about how he's preparing for kingship. And that preparation looks very different from anything we've seen on the Sussex side. The role of Supreme Governor of the Church of England is one a lot of people don't fully grasp, especially outside the UK, and even inside it's often misunderstood. It's not about being the spiritual leader. That position belongs to the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Supreme Governor role is something different, something more constitutional and symbolic, but still incredibly powerful in what it represents. It's about formally heading the institution, appointing senior figures with guidance from the Prime Minister, and standing as the link between the Church and the state. This all goes back centuries to the English Reformation, when Henry VIII broke away from Rome and created the Church of England under the authority of the Crown. From that moment on, the monarch has held this title, and while the day-to-day influence has shifted over time, the symbolic weight of the role has never faded. And then you have Queen Elizabeth II, who took that responsibility to another level entirely. For her, this wasn't just a title or a tradition to maintain. It was deeply personal. Her faith wasn't hidden or vague. It was clear, consistent, and central to how she lived her life and carried out her duties. She spoke about it openly, and not in general terms, but in a way that made it obvious this was something she truly believed in. Those Christmas broadcasts over the decades weren't just routine messages, they were heartfelt reflections. They felt like spiritual conversations with the public where she shared what guided her, what grounded her, and what gave her strength. There was no performance in it, no ambiguity. It came across as sincere, steady, and completely authentic, and that's why it resonated with so many people for so long. For William, stepping into this role comes with a completely different kind of pressure, and it's not small. He's part of a generation that sees faith in a very different way than his grandmother did, and that shift changes everything. The era of visible, public religiosity that defined the mid-20th century has faded. In its place is something more private, more personal, and sometimes more uncertain. For many people in William's world, going to church every Sunday isn't the default anymore. It's far more common to hear someone describe themselves as spiritual but not religious, or connected to faith in a personal way without fully attaching to the institution. That's the environment William is operating in, and it creates a real challenge. Because one day, he won't just be king, he'll be the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, formally tied to an institution that carries centuries of history and expectation. And here's the tension. He can't simply copy Queen Elizabeth II because that wouldn't be real. He's not her, and trying to present himself in that same mold would feel forced and unconvincing. But at the same time, he can't come across as detached or indifferent, because that would weaken both his credibility and the institution he's meant to represent. So where does that leave him? It looks like he's carving out a middle path, and it's a careful one. Quiet faith, private conviction, and a serious, grounded approach to the responsibility itself. Not something performed for cameras, not something exaggerated for effect, but something that exists even when no one is watching. And that might actually be the most honest position available to him right now. It reflects who he really is, while still respecting the weight of what he's stepping into. His presence at the enthronement fits perfectly into that approach. He showed up, he took part, he marked the importance of the moment. But he didn't try to put on a version of religiosity that doesn't come naturally to him, and that restraint says just as much as any public display ever could. The new archbishop is, by many accounts, someone William is already building a real working relationship with, and that's a big deal. These relationships aren't just formal, They can shape the direction of both the church and the monarchy for years, even decades. History shows just how much this matters. The dynamic between Elizabeth II and Robert Runcie was very different from her relationship with George Carey, and each of those partnerships led to completely different outcomes for how the church and crown operated together. These aren't small details. They set the tone for entire eras. William is known to think long-term, and he understands exactly what's at stake here. This enthronement isn't just a one-day ceremony. It's the starting point of what could become one of the defining institutional relationships of his future reign. And this is where his approach stands out. This is preparation happening quietly, carefully, and with intention. It doesn't create instant headlines or viral moments. It's not designed for quick attention like a documentary drop, a media briefing, or a high-profile event overseas. But this is the kind of work that actually matters, the kind that builds real understanding over time, not just the appearance of it. Because there's a clear difference between someone who genuinely knows the institution they're about to lead and someone who is just performing that knowledge for the public. And that contrast is hard to miss right now. On one side, you have a future king stepping into serious, private preparation, engaging with faith, responsibility, and the structure he'll inherit. On the other side, a very different strategy is playing out, one that's far more public, far more immediate, and built around visibility. And when you put those two paths side by side, the direction each one is heading in becomes very clear. What's playing out right now couldn't be more different. On one side, you've got a future king focused on duty, faith, and long-term responsibility. On the other, a lifestyle brand pushing emails about cheese boards, a self-inserted appearance at a struggling podcast retreat in Australia, and press chatter about possible invitations to Sandringham. These stories are unfolding at the same time, in the same media cycle, about two people who were once seen on a similar level in the public eye. And now, the gap between them, in seriousness, in substance, in direction, is becoming impossible to ignore. Anyone looking at both sides without bias can see it clearly. The paths have split and they're not heading anywhere close to the same place. Now bring the focus back to Australia because there's more going on here than just appearances. The trademark filings add a whole new layer and they make the strategy much clearer. It's come out that Meghan has been filing trademarks in Australia connected to the As Ever brand. That's a calculated move. Trademark filings aren't casual paperwork. They're legal signals of real business intent. When you file in a specific country, you're saying something direct. You plan to operate there, sell products, build a presence, maybe even expand into physical or online retail. So this retreat? It's not just a one-off event. It's a setup, a launch point. It's about creating visibility, getting media attention, and putting the brand in front of a new audience. It builds awareness, starts conversations, and lays the groundwork for future sales. In that sense, the retreat becomes more than just a weekend event. It's the opening move in a much bigger commercial play, and every detail around it starts to make a lot more sense when you see it that way. When you look at it this way, the strategy actually starts to make more sense. It's not random, it's structured, and there is a clear commercial goal behind it. But here's the problem, and it's a big one. The execution doesn't match the ambition at all. That first entry point into a new market really matters. It sets the tone, it shapes perception, and people remember it. And right now, that beachhead moment is tied to a podcast retreat with a questionable setup, a venue still being worked on, and a public response that's overwhelmingly negative. That's not the kind of launch you want attached to your brand, because strong brand entries usually come in with energy, excitement, and something that feels fresh and genuinely useful to the audience. That creates momentum you can actually build on. But launching into a space where 95% of responses are negative, where the event itself is under scrutiny, and where the overall setup feels unstable, that creates a very different starting point. The trademark filings show clear intent. Meghan wants a real presence in that market, no question. But intent alone isn't enough. The conditions around the launch tell a different story about how ready that move actually is. And then there's one more detail from this week that caught attention. The brief appearance of her daughter in the content. It was subtle, carefully framed, and clearly designed to feel warm and relatable. A quiet moment of a mother and child doing something creative together, the kind of image that lifestyle brands use to build emotional connection. But for some viewers, it didn't fully land as natural. It came across as something shaped for the camera, rather than something simply happening on its own. And that difference, even when it's slight, doesn't go unnoticed. What people are picking up on here is something subtle, but powerful. When you watch Catherine around children, whether it's her own or others, the interaction feels real because it's not perfect. She reacts in the moment, laughs at things as they happen, and adjusts to whatever the child does next. It's not controlled, it unfolds naturally, and that's exactly why it connects. You can't fully script that kind of interaction because the body gives things away. Real reactions, small pauses, unexpected moments, they all show up, whether you plan them or not. Now, compare that to the brief glimpses of Lilibet in Meghan's content. What stands out to some viewers is how carefully everything seems framed. The child is placed within the shot, and the moment feels presented rather than lived. Instead of watching a spontaneous interaction, it can come across as an adult guiding how the moment looks on camera. The image signals motherhood, but it doesn't fully show the messy, real texture that usually comes with it. Now, to be fair, this isn't a simple situation. Being on camera changes behavior, especially for children. Awareness of being filmed can make anyone more controlled, more cautious, and that affects how natural things appear. But when people compare patterns over time, they start noticing differences. Catherine's moments tend to feel slightly unfiltered, while Meghan's often feel slightly managed. And for audiences who consume a lot of this kind of content, that distinction stands out quickly. The idea that showing motherhood could strengthen public connection is not wrong at all. It's actually a smart move on paper. But again, the execution becomes the focus, because it reflects the same pattern seen elsewhere. The structure is there, the intention is clear, everything looks right on the surface. But underneath that, something feels just out of reach. And that gap between appearance and authenticity? That's the detail people keep coming back to, because once you notice it, it's hard to ignore. What makes lifestyle content actually work is simple, but hard to fake. The audience has to believe that the person at the center of it is truly living that life. Not a flawless version, not something overly polished, but something real. A life with quirks, imperfections, genuine interests, and actual know-how that comes from doing it day in and day out. And the moment that belief slips, everything starts to fall apart. Because the entire brand depends on that trust. Once the audience stops buying into it, the content loses its purpose almost instantly. And this audience isn't passive. They're sharp. They've seen it all before. They compare constantly, and they know when something feels off. It doesn't take long for them to spot the difference between something authentic and something that just looks the part. That's where the As Ever brand is struggling right now. And this didn't start this week. The flower arranging clips, the brief family moments, the Australia trademarks, the retreat situation, these are all just the latest examples. They're not the root of the issue, they're symptoms of something deeper. Because at the center of it all is one key problem. The brand is built around presenting a lifestyle that doesn't fully come across as genuinely lived, and no amount of polished content, curated emails, or strategic expansion into new markets can fix that if the core doesn't hold up. The foundation of any brand like this is the person behind it. And right now, that foundation isn't convincing people the way it needs to. And here's the hard truth. That's not a messaging issue. It's not something you solve with better captions or smarter PR. It's a substance issue. And substance can't be manufactured through presentation alone, which brings everything to one final thread from this week, and it might be the one that ties all of this together. This last point is worth slowing down for, because it cuts deeper than the headlines and the drama. It gets into something that doesn't get enough attention, but explains a lot once you see it clearly. There's a growing observation that Harry and Meghan are operating without a strong, grounded family infrastructure around them. And that kind of isolation doesn't just affect emotions, it shapes decisions, judgment, and direction over time. Think about what a solid family structure normally provides. It's not just support, it's balance. It's people who know you well enough to challenge you, to say things you might not want to hear, but need to hear. It's people who have seen you in different phases of life, who understand your patterns, your strengths, and your blind spots. That kind of perspective can't be replaced easily. And most importantly, it's advice without an agenda. The kind that exists because of history, not because of opportunity or current positioning. In Harry's case, a lot of that structure has been pulled away. His relationship with his father, his brother, and the wider royal network has been heavily strained, and in practical terms, that support system isn't available to him in the same way anymore. Years of public conflict and legal battles have created distance that's hard to bridge quickly, if at all. Then there's the circle of longtime friends, people who knew him before everything changed, who might have offered grounding or pushback when things started moving fast. Many of those relationships reportedly faded early on, especially when concerns about how quickly things were evolving were taken as criticism instead of care. So what's left? A much tighter circle, one that appears to be centered largely around Meghan's network and priorities. And that shift matters more than it seems, because when your world gets smaller, the range of input gets smaller too. And when that happens, blind spots don't get challenged, they get reinforced. And over time, that kind of environment can shape not just decisions, but the entire direction of how everything unfolds. When you're surrounded by people whose interests are tied to keeping the brand alive and maintaining approval, something important breaks down. Bad ideas don't get stopped, they get polished and pushed forward. And that's exactly what this starts to look like. The Australia retreat? That raises questions. The cheese board email? That doesn't land the way it should. The self-invited appearance at a podcast event? That adds to the pattern. These aren't the kinds of moves you usually see coming out of a strong, experienced team that's willing to challenge decisions internally. In a well-functioning setup, someone steps in, asks hard questions, and slows things down before they go public. But here, that filtering process doesn't seem visible. And when that layer is missing, everything changes. Because this isn't just about one or two missteps, it points to something structural. Without honest, informed feedback from people who understand the space and are willing to speak up, decision-making starts to drift. And once that happens, the results show up everywhere. In the content, in the events, in the messaging, and in the overall direction being taken. Now for Harry, the situation carries a different tone. But it's just as serious. The isolation hits in another way. From what's been reported, there are clear signs he's not fully settled or content with how things have unfolded. And the people who might be able to sit him down, speak plainly, and help him think through his next steps aren't really in reach anymore. Some of those connections were cut off, others stepped back over time, and some may simply no longer be part of his day-to-day world. And when the circle around you is shaped by maintaining the current setup rather than questioning it, it becomes much harder to step back and see things clearly. Books like 𝗣𝗿𝗶, biographies from figures like 𝗣𝗍𝗵𝗏, and even the palace's unusually direct comments about low trust are all doing the same thing in different ways. They're acting as outside voices, saying things that don't seem to be getting said inside Harry and Meghan's immediate circle. But here's the catch. External voices are easy to dismiss when they're seen as hostile. Label them unfair, push back with legal threats, counter with press briefings, and the whole thing gets reframed as noise rather than feedback. And once that happens, something important gets lost. Because instead of those outside signals being absorbed, questioned, and potentially leading to change, they're blocked out completely. That creates a kind of closed loop. The internal environment stays the same decisions get made, and the same patterns keep repeating. But what's different now is the weight of what's building up. It's not just one story or one bad headline, it's everything stacking together. The stalled deals, the polling numbers, the firm stance from the palace, the muted reaction to certain books, the questions around events like the Australia retreat. Each piece on its own might be manageable, but together they start to form a picture that's harder and harder to ignore. And this is why it feels like things are moving somewhere, not just repeating. The gap between the story being presented and what people are actually seeing is getting wider. At a certain point, that gap can't be closed with messaging alone. No amount of framing or media strategy can fully bridge it. That moment hasn't completely landed yet, but everything is pointing in that direction. So the real question isn't if a turning point is coming, it's when it hits, how it plays out, and whether there's still time to shift course before it does. William standing at the enthronement of a new archbishop isn't just a formal appearance, it's a signal of something much bigger. It shows a man preparing quietly but seriously for a role that carries real weight and real consequence. Because what he's moving toward isn't just a title, it's a reckoning of a different kind. a reckoning with duty, with history, and with the responsibility of becoming king in a system that demands consistency, discipline, and long-term commitment. At the same time, you have two members of the same family heading toward completely different futures, and the way they're preparing couldn't be more different. One path is loud, visible, and built through content, press cycles, and high-profile appearances. The other is quieter, slower, and focused on relationships, institutions, and understanding the role from the inside out. And here's the key difference. The kind of preparation that gets attention right now isn't always the kind that lasts. The work that actually builds something solid tends to happen away from the spotlight. It's less exciting to watch, but far more important over time. William seems to understand that clearly. The people around him appear to understand it too. And when you put both approaches side by side, especially this week, the contrast isn't subtle anymore. It's sharp, it's visible, and it's becoming harder and harder for anyone watching closely to overlook.